Good evening, I'm Cathy Lewis, and here's what matters this week. Dr. Billy Cannaday got his start in school administration on the peninsula, and this fall he'll leave his post as State Superintendent of Public Education to become Dean of UVA's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. Dr. Cannaday joins us tonight from Richmond. Thanks for being here. It's good to talk with you tonight.
Thank you, Cathy.
Congratulations on the promotion, by the way. It's a wonderful new opportunity, and we congratulate you on it. But, you know, it's interesting to look at the work that you've done as superintendent of the state in the context of what our young people are moving into in terms of the world economy. We've just read this report in the last year or so on the state of the workforce in America, and it really makes very clear that our younger people are going to be going into a global workforce. If they don't work around the world, they will be working in a workforce that's affected by events around the world. So I wonder if you would put your work in that context for us.
Well, Cathy, thank you for framing it that way. I think it's clearly obvious to all of us as we watched the Olympics this past 3 weeks that we saw when looking at Beijing, were it not for the introduction, you would have thought you were in New York City, possibly Richmond, or some other major American city. What you realize is that we are becoming more similar than different when it comes down to the economy. One of the things that we've looked at, and the State Board in particular has been focusing on, is making certain that we have an excellent statewide system of public education so that young people not only have equal opportunity to learn in a safe and healthy environment, but also that they're prepared for this global marketplace.
And so go ahead, I'm sorry.
One thing that technology has done is it has shrink-wrapped the world for our young people. So what at one point in time was so remote that you couldn't overcome time and place without there being huge barriers, now those places are easily accessible to consumers but also producers.
You know, it's such a good point, and it really puts in sharp relief the idea that certainly the world in which these young people are moving and the challenges that they will face and the education that they will require in some respects is so dramatically different from what their parents needed. Even though for many of their parents computers were coming on the scene, it's still just the rate of growth and change has just been dramatic.
Well, when one begins to think that last year's graduates, not 2008 but 2007, it was the first group of seniors where they had only known that there was technology and the internet. The internet really commercially is only about 13 years old, whereas for most baby boomers or those who were born in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, they clearly see the internet as a new invention, where our young people, those who graduate in the class of 2007 and beyond that point, see that as being just a main enabling tool that they can use. And so that really has generated the need for different types of skill sets. And because it's international in scope, it requires higher levels of not only knowledge acquisition, but skill acquisition for young people to compete with high wage, high opportunity kinds of work experiences.
And you know, we hear that when we see any number of these reports that come out on the state of the workforce. I'm thinking especially about a report that came out in 2007 that really spoke to that issue and called, in fact, for a pretty fundamental rethink, especially of the high school experience. This report noted that while the world, as you point out as well, has changed dramatically in the last 50 years, the high school experience itself is not fundamentally different. And this was, of course, a major initiative of the National Governors Association a few years back. I wonder what, from your perspective and talking with your colleagues across the country, one of the things that that report pointed out is that we really ought to think about ending high school at the age of 16 or thereabouts and offering some different kinds of options. In other words, ending high school after 2 years. And I wonder, as someone who looks at these issues, how would you reconstruct the high school experience so that it is relevant for this world in which we find ourselves?
Well, first of all, while the report talked about a need to radically change high school, one of the basic premises that it laid was this whole notion of stopping high school earlier and then having young people go into one of two paths, either to the career and technical path or for further education. That's the part where I really question about whether or not that is appropriate, but instead I think we have to prepare young people for not only work we know about, but things we don't know yet about that certainly you don't want to eliminate possibilities for young people. With that said, I think that the high school experience has to have several dimensions to it that are different. One is there needs to be greater importance given to connecting what is learned in school with application in the real world outside of school, from civics to mathematics, from science application to learning about environmental issues. You have to have a body of content knowledge, but it needs to be in the context of how does it play out in everyday life or in work experiences in your community or around the world. I think the second thing that we have to consider is that in this country, we have the shortest academic year of any highly industrialized country. So to talk about we're going to shorten high school without giving attention to time needed not only to explore and to learn things in depth, but to create a wider base. One area certainly is in the area of language acquisition. Mm-hmm. You know, in our country, everyone's expected to master, be proficient in English, both speaking and writing. But we've not given attention to the fact that we're going to be most likely engaged in workplaces where there are more than just the American culture, people that speak multiple languages, and we are going to have to make certain that our young people feel quite facile and at least comfortable conversationally with a language other than English, so that they can participate in a marketplace that will have different players at the table than those that were at the table when you and I went through high school.
Yeah. You know, that's such an important point about foreign language, and as you probably know, here in Hampton Roads this summer, there was for the first time a camp that was produced in concert between Norfolk Public Schools and Norfolk State University that sought to expose young high school students to Arabic. Certainly Arabic is one of those what they call critical languages, such as Urdu and all the rest, these languages that will be critically important in the new world, if you will. And so it brought up an interesting point, which has to do with the shortage of such teachers and the fact that it's going to take, obviously, some resources to attract those teachers and to build that capacity. That's, you know, sort of the one point. And the other point is, and I recognize that school systems are big things and it's hard to turn them on a dime, but we have a number of other languages that we have been teaching over time. And so I wonder, as you begin to integrate these newer languages, does that mean necessarily that you have to drop some of the languages that you have been teaching, or do you try to just make the size of the pie bigger?
Well, I don't think we want to drop languages because right now, certainly a lot of attention is being given to both countries to the west of us, in this case primarily China and India, but also you know, the traditional languages of, you know, French and Spanish and German also are becoming increasingly important because the European economy is beginning to bounce back and to thrive. So I think really the whole notion that we shouldn't be talking about foreign languages, but we should be talking about other languages. Right. And once you can learn one language other than your own, you're more likely to overcome that apprehension about learning other languages, cultures, and then how to do business and work with those individuals that come from a different culture and a different experience.
You know, that's an interesting point, too, and it gets back to this issue of high school reform, because typically speaking, we begin to introduce language in the middle schools or at least by high school. And as you know, the thinking is, and the scientific feedback seems to indicate that we humans learn language best when we learn it young. And so I wonder what you see in terms of making another language a part of that early curriculum, maybe in the preschool or the early elementary school levels.
Well, currently there is a Virginia incentive program that the state board endorsed and the governor has embraced that really encourages and recognizes school divisions that start as one of the criteria that introduce a language other than English in the elementary grades. You are very correct in what the research says, is that you know, language acquisition is more easily you know, learned by students when they're very young as compared to very old or older. One of the things that we've learned also in doing research in this area is that you have to think in another language and not think in English and then translate into a different language, because then you really have a great difficult time being conversational. And we all know that every culture has their own colloquial sayings and phrases, so it becomes critically important. The earlier you experience, or I should say expose young people to a language, English in another language, the more likely they're going to be capable of mastering multiple languages.
And I understand, too, it has other impacts on even other kinds of learning. So, you know, it's just hard to imagine that there's any downside to learning other languages. But as we think about this issue of the early education experience, as you know, Governor Kane has been very passionate on this issue, advocating a preschool experience for young people, certainly based on some of that very same brain research that demonstrates that so much of the hard wiring that young people have is really put in place by the time they hit school, which is a real different way of thinking about those early years, as more education opportunities than custodial opportunities.
Well, and that research also tells us clearly that there's a connection between neuroscience and one's physical health and how it does facilitate improved learning, or it can become a barrier. Early into a child's development, they begin to develop first vocabulary. And that vocabulary really is the precursor to reading comprehension and understanding and fluency, and that leads to other reading to learn activities that occur in the primary grades. And as they get older, then you're learning to read in the primary grades, and then as you get older, it's reading to learn. We feel that it's critically important that we have conversations in every community around what are the things that need to be in place to support young people and families to ensure that young kids have appropriate health care, that they also have appropriate interactions that stimulate their thinking and their vocabulary, so that they can transition from preschool into kindergarten more ready to handle the challenges and opportunities that school provide starting in kindergarten.
And I wonder, Dr. Cannaday, as you know, that conversation, I think there are lots of people who say, boy, it sounds like a great idea, but the money is an issue. It's an expensive program to implement. I wonder how hopeful you are that the funding will be found to do that to the degree that we're able to reach every child in that 3- and 4-year-old range.
Well, we don't know yet in terms of what path we'll have to take to make that happen, but I was very pleased at what the General Assembly and the governor were able to agree on this past year, and that is that we are going to increase by some 6,000 students the number of young people who are at greatest risk of not being ready for school, that they would have the opportunity to be served in a preschool experience. That becomes a huge step in the right direction. There are families that certainly do provide appropriate early childhood experiences and preschool experiences for their children, but there are many others that children are left pretty much to watch a video or to watch television, very little human interaction. They don't develop the appropriate vocabulary experiences that will enable them to thrive in a literature-rich or kind of experience that takes place in early elementary school. So I think that our first step is to find those who are most susceptible to not having that kind of preschool experience and support them. And then communities look at how do they make certain there's a wide range of opportunities to ensure that every child has a great preschool experience, whether it be supported by the state or locality, or it's provided by parents through private providers. You know,
it strikes me that that's another area where the whole premise has to change from generation to generation, because, you know, I think about baby boomers who really didn't have that kind of exposure, and if it's not in your background, you know, you can't really necessarily understand the importance of it. But it occurs to me that that's another place where we have to do this sort of fundamental rethink based on this new information and this new science that takes us in somewhat of a different direction in that regard. The other place it seems that we have issues, and I know you struggle with this, as do your colleague superintendents across the Commonwealth, has to do with teacher training and the very significant drain that we will see in the classroom with the retirement of some of these teachers who've come through in those baby boom years. So many of them, with all of that experience, are getting ready to retire. And in fact, I talked with one superintendent about a year ago who told me, Cathy, he said, we are actually hiring people now that we would not have interviewed 5 years ago. That's how desperate this teacher crisis is becoming. How much of an issue do you think that is, and what can be done about it?
Well, I think it's a significant issue. People assume that everyone can teach if you have an advanced degree. The research does not bear that out to be true, and more importantly, the empirical evidence from young people, if you just talk with them, they will tell you, just because someone has great knowledge acquisition doesn't make them a good teacher. The skills required of being able to package information that inspires and builds on innate student inquiry. They're very inquisitive when they're very young. And how do you take that curiosity and build on it so that they'll want to learn things that they yet know, and that also that they're willing to sustain the kind of persistent effort that's needed to learn difficult things. I think that the challenges we face with trying to not only retain highly qualified teachers but attract them really center around, in part, around the profession. Every community should find ways to elevate the importance of the profession. I know we talk quite a bit about salaries, which are important to make certain that we attract the best. But also, it's how we actually show respect for those professionals who do this work. Without having outstanding teachers, all the other professions are left really to the will and ingenuity of a parent or an adult, or worse yet, a learner, to figure out how to do this. I think it is very short-sighted of us to assume that education alone is an expense. Yes, it is expensive, but it's an important investment in every community's future. You know, the next generation of leaders, the next generation of citizens in a community really start with what Jefferson talked about, is, you know, a democracy that includes all citizens, that really are focused on the common good. So I would hope that we, one, elevate the profession. We find ways also to make certain that we can create some flexibility in our industry or in our business, so that people who really leave early into their careers will find another reason to stay. And part of that is mentoring support. I think for teachers who have been in for a long time, the real issue is finding ways to allow their creativity to be leveraged in ways so that they find, again, that continued excitement of wanting to remain as a teacher.
Dr. Cannaday, one of the things we are told by teachers leaving the profession, either because of retirement or leaving early, it has to do with an initiative of some years ago, and I know that that it has been continued successively, and that, of course, is the standards of learning. And I think there are lots of people who would look at that and say, well, good and worthy goals to create a circumstance in which a high school diploma from Danville means the same thing as a high school diploma coming out of Fairfax County. Well done. But there is this concern that the SOLs are deeply focused on rote learning, and in fact the Virginia Beach superintendent has just announced that he and his district is going to be looking at some ways to do a fundamental rethink on the curriculum to get to capture more of this idea of creative thinking and of sort of critical thinking. And so I wonder, as you've been in this post for this period of time, and gosh, I think you were a superintendent when the SOLs came on the scene. Are you satisfied that the SOLs are doing what they need to do? And if not, what would you do to change that process?
Well, first of all, let's create the context for how the standards of learning actually came into being. We were always telling each other as professionals at times, and in other cases we did not share this fact, that high expectations were not for every child. It was just for some children. Those who came interested, those who had adult advocates at home, and those who seemed to fit the system well. That was fine during our era of baby boomers, when the economy didn't require everyone to be highly competent and effective to be able to find a a job or pursue a career that can take care of yourself and others. Those years have gone by and they're likely never to return. So the standards of learning were really brought into place because we had learned from 20 years that we had very low expectations of all youngsters. As a matter of fact, in the 70s, by the 11th grade, when students were to graduate, they had to show that they were competent in reading and mathematics at the 3rd grade level. In the 80s, we moved that to, they had to be competent in 4th and 5th grade reading and mathematics by the 8th grade. So the standards of learning acknowledge that we were not raising the bar for all young people. Now, let's talk about this whole issue of creativity and critical thinking. You can't take those in isolation without knowing something. So one is with the standards of learning, it creates a content knowledge base and a skill base that allows you now to be able to apply that in ways that are authentic in nature and also designed to help you to be a critical thinker in this kind of new age knowledge economy. I think what we have failed to acknowledge is that we've raised the bar considerably for all, but we've held time constant. Yes, we do enrichment activities, we do remediation after school, we have summers, but the real issue is that from September to June, we've raised the bar for all. We've made certain that every young person, we're accountable for every youngster to learning. And in doing so, we have in some places made that the primary focus without thinking about how can you teach the skill and knowledge without sacrificing on the importance of creativity. In the arts, in career and technical education, they are critically important enabling careers that require application of the knowledge learned and skills acquired. So I think that what the real challenge is not, are we going to do the SOLs? And really, remember, they are expectations for minimum learning, albeit higher and more rigorous. The real issue is how do you build on that, not to replace that. And I think one of the things we'll have to talk about and communities will have to wrestle with is we're going to have to rethink what a year looks like, possibly what an academic day looks like, and what is the appropriate balance that we need to kind of find to make certain that we can do things in depth and not just in breadth, meaning, cover a wide range of things.
Sure. It's such a great point. Dr. Cannaday, thank you so much for being with us today. Congratulations on your career as superintendent, and we hope to see you back in Hampton Roads sometime soon, and best of success at the University of Virginia.
Thank you very much.
You bet. It'll be very interesting to take a look at those issues and see where we go with regard to some of the issues Dr. Cannaday talked about, length of that school day, length of that school year. So we will come back to those issues from time to time, I'm sure. And I'll be back in a moment with a look at what matters to you. About our show on the indictment of 2 commissioners and the sheriff in Gloucester, Lisa Godley has this from longtime Gloucester resident Zach Loesch, who supports the firing of the county administrator at issue in the case.
While we are no longer a rural community of farms and fishermen and have become a bedroom community located on the edge of the Hampton Roads region, we do not yet desire the type of concrete, steel, and glass development one sees in downtown Newport News. We seek to preserve the suburban and semi-rural character of our county that we now enjoy for as long as we can. The indicted supervisors did the right thing in the wrong way. I sort of feel sorry for them.
If we brought you something that's inspired you, and I know that's a two-edged sword, just give us a call at 889-9437. You can write us at 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, Virginia, 23508, or give us an email at whatmatters@whro.org. And if you want to know what's coming up on future shows, we have a new opportunity for you. You can sign up for our What Matters e-bit or e-bite. We're not sure which it is. Go to our website, whatmatters.tv, and what we'll do is send you a list every week of what we plan for the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again next week for another look at what matters, and know that we'll be coming back to this issue of education. It's so critically important for all of us, regardless of whether you have school-age children, regardless of whether you have your children in private school. It really matters what happens to our education system. So we'll be talking about that in the weeks and months ahead as well. Thanks for watching. Good night.